Yo, everybody, I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon and The Blackest Heart, both books published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today I'm going to be reviewing Return of the King. I've already reviewed Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers elsewhere on my channel. If you want to watch those reviews, just type in Durfee and the title of the book, and the video will magically appear upon your screen. I swear it will. Let's talk about Return of the King. We're going to talk about the covers first. Now, I read The Lord of the Rings, The Sword of Shannara was the first ever fantasy book I read. Then I read The Lord of the Rings after that. And I loved them, of course. Let's talk about the covers first, because I like to buy different versions of The Lord of the Rings. I've got a whole shelf downstairs of just Lord of the Rings books, different versions with different covers. It's just kind of one of my things. So I want to talk about them. Let's talk about, this is the actual book that I bought when I was like 13 years old. It had the old Daryl K. Sweet cover on it, which is great. The price is still on it. I think the price was $2.99 or something like that. I remember I bought them out of the Safeway supermarket paperback rack. I bought the Fellowship of the Ring, the Two Towers, and the Return of the King right off of the rack. I took them. They were $2.99 a piece. I took them up to the cash register in the Safeway in Richfield, Utah, which is in Sevier County, which is a remote place. And I remember the cash register lady ringing up my 3 novels and saying that will be $9 and some odd cents. And then she said, who would spend $9 on books? That's ridiculous. I don't know whatever happened to that lady, but, God bless her. I hope she ended up falling in love with books one day soon and spent $9. I don't know. To me, it was a investment well worth it. But anyway, this was the book. This was the book. And then let's take a look at some of the others. This is one of the ones I just barely bought. A new set came out, and it had these covers by an illustrator named John Egerkrans. And I thought they were cool, so I bought the set. They looked really nice. And then I've had this set for a while, The Return of the King. This one, the Alan Lee cover. This set came out about 12 years ago with the John Jude Palancar cover. I really like that. I've got my little teeny leather-bound ones that you can carry in your pocket that have the type that's so tiny. I actually really quite like this design too, this paperback design. And then probably the best is the this collector's edition. And again, another Alan Lee painting. And this one's really cool. So if you want to get a great Tolkien set, go on Amazon.com, the British version, and they're selling these. They're really nice. Anyway, let's talk about, one of them fell on the floor, but I'll hold it up as we talk. Let's talk about The Return of the King itself. I mean, this is one of those stories that I read as a kid probably 10 to 12 times. I would read it about every 3 or 4 months. I would reread The Lord of the Rings. So I've read these probably 10 times as a kid. As an adult, I've probably read them 5 more times. So that's 15 times I've read these books. And then I've probably watched the Peter Jackson movies about another 15 times. So this is one of those stories that is just part of my DNA. And I'm probably not alone. A lot of you that are watching this probably would say the same exact thing. That The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, we can probably all do a book review of it from just off the top of our head. I did reread this. I actually listened to the audible.com version over the period of a couple weeks as I drove about in my car. One of the things that struck me about this is the staggered chapters. The staggered chapters always bothered me, where it was like the first half of the book was just Gandalf and Minas Tirith, and then the second half of the book was Frodo and Sam and Gollum. And the Two Towers was the same way. What I did when I was reading these as a kid is I did not like the staggered. I did not like the chunk of the story and then the other chunk of the. So I would stagger the chapters. I would like read one chapter about Aragorn and I would go read about Frodo and Sam, then I'd read about Gandalf, so I would go back and forth. When you're doing it on Audible, you cannot do that. You've got to listen to the book straight through. So now I was reading it in a way that I hadn't read it in a long time, which was just the whole Minas Tirith block and chunk of stuff, and then that storyline kind of comes to a halt, and then we get the Frodo and Sam and Gollum going towards Mount Doom part of it, and I was just like, I'd been so used to staggering the chapters. Anyway, it was a little off-putting for me. The other thing that, and we're not, we all know the story. If you're watching this, you know the story. I don't need to recap any of the plot. The one thing about it is the language, the way that Tolkien writes. I do want to talk about that because it's just poetic. It's beautiful. I love it. A lot of people think it's clunky and it takes time and it's a waste time and it's just hard to read and it gets boring, but I absolutely drink it in and I just love it. I just think it's gorgeous. And when it's read by the right voice narrator, which Audible had, it can be even better. And then he started getting into the appendices, which I actually listened to and actually fell in love with, because I'd never really spent too much time in the appendices when I read it prior, especially as a kid. I just wasn't interested. But listening to this guy narrate the appendices, I learned so much about Tolkien lore and the history of Middle-earth. Things that I didn't know about, things that were hinted at here and now throughout the narrative and throughout the Peter Jackson movies, this yada, yada, yada. But I was just riveted when he started reading about the Barem and Luthien and them stealing the Silmaril and, the hints of Aragorn and Arwen's relationship prior to the Lord of the Rings and how that doomed love was, the love was doomed from the start. I mean, those are hinted at in the stories, especially the movies. They're a little bit drawn out a little bit more. But I just loved the appendices, learning about the kings of the Mark and, Helm Hammerhand and how he related to Theoden. I'd heard the name mentioned in the movies, and then to read kind of his history of Azog and Durin's Bane and the Khazad-dûm and Moria and the Dunedain, the Numenor and Dunedain kings. All of those things that were in the appendices were just fantastic. Now, I did read the Silmarillion a hell of a long time ago. And so now that's got me jazzed to reread that for the channel coming up here real soon. And maybe a lot of the other histories of the Middle-earth, which I do have. I've not ever read them. I just bought them because they look cool in my Lord of the Rings shelf. But I'll probably delve into those and see what else I can learn about the history of Middle-earth, especially considering Amazon's new series focuses on that a little bit, I guess. I guess it goes back into the history from what I've learned, or what I've gleaned from watching the trailer. Although, I will say... Anyway, I won't say. I'll reserve judgment. I'll reserve judgment on that. Return of the King. Mos Def, 10 out of 10. Oh, my Lord. You can't do better than The Lord of the Rings. For fantasy literature, for just literature in general, it is probably the single most great creation in the world. Might be exaggerating a little bit.